Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Sake on Air. We're recording from Japan Sake and Shochu Association.
Liar. I know. Usually we're recording from there.
Okay,
So every now we can say that. It's okay.
Are you sure?
It's totally okay. Sometimes there's logistical issues that we have to contend with on occasion. So we are in spirit. We are transmitting. We're transmitting sake infused. What?
The people of Sake actually brought me into Sake.
Back in 1988, this place was actually in Ginza on the main drag.
At first it was kind of soy sauce, it was miso.
To the point where it actually changed my life.
New Year's Day 1989.
Not just sake as a beverage, but all the culture and history.
Welcome and thank you for once again tuning in to a brand new episode of Sake on Air, the world's #1 podcast dedicated to expanding the dialogue on Japan's two most iconic beverages, sake and shochu. My name is Justin Potts, one of several of you regular sake navigators here on the show. And this week we will be talking with two very inspiring gentlemen about what goes into starting up a new sake brewery outside of Japan. This week we are joined by Mr. David Joll, head brewer and owner of Zenkuro, based in Queenstown, New Zealand. And together with him we also have Mr. Mathew Shaw, the co-owner and head brewer of what is soon to be Melbourne Sake. When we got together with these gentlemen, we ended up starting to chat, and before we knew it, we were there for nearly 3 hours. Because of that, we decided to split this episode into two parts because there just wasn't enough fat to trim away. We wanted to keep as much of it intact so that we can share with you the stories of what these gentlemen have gone through, are going through, and are looking forward to in the future of their sake brewing careers. This week, I'm joined by Marie Nagata, Sebastien Lemoine, and Chris Hughes. We'll have part 2 of this episode coming your way in the coming days, so stay tuned for that. But until then, let's start the show.
We're sending the love. We're sending the love from. We're sending the love from the Japan Sake and Shochu Information Center.
Yeah.
And we have diffused that to a hidden location in eastern Tokyo, from where we're broadcasting today.
That we are. We're just having to make do with an unusual arrangement today. I am joined by our usual hosts of Justin Potts, Christopher Hughes, and Sebastien Lemoine.
Hello.
Hello.
And who are you?
I am Marie. I'm usually the voice that goes and ah in the background, if you haven't noticed. And today we're joined by Dave Joll from Zenkuro from New Zealand, as well as Matt Shaw from Melbourne Sake. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Marie.
Welcome.
And team.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So the whole premise of this episode is on building and running a brewery outside of Japan. You, Dave, are a seasoned veteran in brewing, with your Zenkuro series of sake winning some quite impressive awards as of late. And you, Matt, the art of brewing and planning to go commercial sometime soon. So with that all being said, Dave, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners and start the show?
Okay, thank you very much, Marie and team. It's an honour to be here today and to have this opportunity to share some of the things that I've done with my team at Zenkuro over the last 5 years. It was very nice of you to introduce me as a veteran. After, in fact, we're not quite at 5 years, but we're in our 5th year, and compared to all the Japanese breweries I visit that are 150 years old, 200 years old, 400 years old, I certainly think we're still absolute novices, but we are trying our best and learning as much as we can as we go. So I'm from New Zealand, and I live in Queenstown, which is down the bottom and the southern end of New Zealand. The latitude is 45 south, so it's about the same as Wakane in Hokkaido, which is 45 north, I think. And a lot of Japanese tend to think we're just a stone's throw from the South Pole, but we're a long way, but there's nothing between New Zealand and the South Pole. So if the wind blows from the south, even in summer, it can be cool, which makes it a pretty good environment for making sake, and which is one of the reasons we decided to give it a go in Queenstown.
Are you originally from here? I mean, from there, or did you move to Queenstown?
Originally from about the middle of the North Island in a place called Whanganui, and then I came to Japan for quite a long time, lived here. When I moved back to New Zealand, I decided Queenstown was the place for me. It's where I wanted to be, and it's a beautiful place, and a very nice, cool, dry climate. We have glacial lakes and mountains and glaciers, obviously, that fill up the lakes, and lots of visitors from all over the world. So it's although it's quite a small town, it's very sort of international.
Did you choose Queenstown because you thought it was a good market for your sake, because it was a good environment to brew, or just because you wanted to live there?
Well, I lived in Japan for about 15 years. And then about 20 years ago, I moved back to New Zealand. At that time, I was a seasoned, after 15 years in Japan, I was a seasoned sake drinker, but I had never thought about actually making sake. So I've been working as a Japanese-speaking guide, interpreter in Queenstown for 15 or so years. And then about 5 years ago, the idea of making sake in New Zealand popped up, and what I guess one of the reasons we decided to go with it is because of the climate in Queenstown and the water, and the fact that it's quite an international little town.
Perfect place.
As it turned out, yes, it's been an important factor. Yeah. Originally the idea was that it was something that could fit in. All our clients, our customers who we guide, are Japanese. So we thought it'd be a nice fit to add something else. You know, we're always looking for things Japanese, and sake, providing sake for our clients was about as far as we thought, probably. And the idea is we'd fit it in with what we're doing, my guiding. But after about 2 years, I realised that it's not feasible, and as sake brewing is not something you can do part-time. Yeah, so I'm now completely over full-time brewing sake and trying to sell it, of course, and spread the word about how wonderful Japan's national beverage is.
Was there like one flash of inspiration or one moment or someone who said something or served you something or kind of that gave you this idea and right there and then it was like, yeah, I'm going to go back to New Zealand, I'm going to brew sake?
It would be nice if I could say yes, but
Doesn't
unfortunately, it's a bit more complicated. I first came to Japan 40 years ago, and since then my life's all been about Japan, doing Japanese things and learning language. I went to university, high school in Japan, university in Japan, Japanese wife and four half Japanese children. And so it kind of evolved. I particularly like Japanese teamwork and doing things together, even if it's repetitive, without talking too much, and just I guess it comes from that Japanese word kata. I like that style of doing things. So one of my partners in Zenkuro is Japanese, and he did get a bit of a head start on us and became the owner of one of Canada's breweries. And I've known him and his family for 30 odd years. About 5 years ago we were talking, he was telling me about his brewery in Canada, and that one day he hoped he could do the same in New Zealand. Perhaps that was when that was the moment I'll put my hand up straight away.
Were people egging you on, or sort of saying, you know, this is crazy, don't do this, or kind of what was the feeling?
That's a really a good question, because I guess with my mates who set the company up with, who are all sort of Japanese, what do you call Japanophiles, and we've done this guiding together for a long time, and always looking for new ideas, and most of them were shot down very early on, and so this was a new idea, which I put to the team. The team loved it, and then we started sort of sending out feelers and trying to get feedback, and to our great surprise and delight, everyone thought it was a good idea, and most importantly, my wife thought it was a good idea as well.
That's what I was going to say. As far as being, you know, supported, there's different, right? There's different aspects you have to take into consideration, and different people's opinions that have to.
Stakeholders.
Oh yeah, it's a balance and teamwork, and you know, when you go into something new, you've got to. It's not often you get the support of everyone, but in this case, I would have to say that we had full support from everyone we spoke to. So that was very encouraging.
So when you go, okay, I think I'm going to do this. Where do you start?
Well, for me, it was go to Japan. What I like doing. In actual fact, it was the idea was that we would get some brewers to come from Japan and brew the sake, and then we could learn from the brewers, and we'd do the sales and marketing and support. But I thought I'd better find out a bit about it first. So I came to Japan and spent some time at Yoshikubo Shizo in Mito. And then I went to Canada. I spent about a month at a very small brewery. And then
Where was that, if you don't mind sharing?
in Vancouver.
Okay.
Called YK3.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm. And once again, that was my partner, Yoshihiro Kawamura. He's invested in that brewery there. So it was easy enough to set that one up. And then shortly after that, I decided I was starting to enjoy this, and decided to take part in John Gorton's sake professional course. And after that, and along with Marie, and once I'd done that, there was it. There was no return.
The hooks were in at that point.
Yeah. And then shortly after that, I went back to New Zealand and started making doburoku in the kitchen until I got kicked out into the garage. And and at that point, the rest of the team decided that I was going to be the brewer. So things sort of changed direction from that point on, and I really got into studying.
Okay, so that wasn't really part of the design from the beginning, is you taking on responsibility, the brewing responsibility?
No, it was something when, you know, you can't say, I'm going to be a sake brewer.
But I think personality-wise and all of that, I think Dave just kind of makes the best fit of them all, because to be a full-time brewer, you need to be quite meticulous, and you need to work within a structure and a regimen. And I think Dave has a wonderful sort of ability to work with structure and his extreme attention to detail. Really,
thank you, Marie, but I didn't know I had that until I started trying to make sake. And yeah, it was.
How do you say DIY guy, or where are you?
That's a phrase you don't use very often.
Just about everything in his brewery is DIY'd.
Yeah, there's and a couple of our helpers as well. None of us are very young. Marie lowered the average age considerably when she was with us. But so we kind of come from that generation where you fix your car yourself, or fix your own lawn mower, or your own barbecue or something like that. You know, you made, if you wanted a chair, a stool or a table or something, you make it yourself. So I guess, and in particular, our parents, our fathers, that's what they did. You know, they didn't buy things. You made do with what you had, and you'd give it a try. It didn't always work, and of course you never throw anything away because there's nothing is junk. So when we started setting up the brewery, all this junk I had around, a lot of which had been handed down from my father all became very useful. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun doing that as well. You know, it's quite satisfying to bring all this stuff out and say, I knew it would be useful.
And you'll find that's, you know, like when you go to these kind of smaller breweries in Japan that maybe are just like not starting up, but maybe they've gone through bad times and they kind of, you know, they're having to kind of revive the brewery in a way. You see this a lot, this kind of, you know, making do with what you have available. And sake brewing is actually very versatile in that respect, isn't it? You don't really need that, you know, special equipment to brew. Is there anything that you absolutely couldn't do without, that you had to buy from Japan or that you had to have made to measure to brew the sake that you're brewing? Or
I guess after a trial and error, at this stage, the yeast is very important, I think.
Okay, not a piece of equipment, but the actual ingredient itself. Okay.
No, though it's just some very simple things. For example, when you're steaming the rice, the material that's used for like the big bags that go into the steamer, it's not available. It has in New Zealand, as far as I know. I started using sheets.
Bed sheets.
Just bed sheets.
Yeah, bed sheets.
Good, but not as good. And that's something, if I'd known about it early on, and because they're not expensive to buy from Japan either, and now that we know who to order from, we can get these simple little things, inexpensive things that improve the quality of the steamed rice or the consistency. The bags we use for our shizuku, our drip pressing. Yeah, we started off with pillowcases, but I think that, like, for example, the weave is a bit too tight. Little things like that, and one brewery that I spent some time at heard about the pillowcases story and method, and decided we needed some. So they gave us some of their spare bags, and it made a huge difference.
They're secretly using the pillowcases.
Yeah, possibly. Other than that, I guess we now have one of those little Woodsman rice washing machines. Just figuring out how to use it, but yeah, that's something that you can only get from Japan, as far as I know. And that, once again, then for the quantities of rice we wash, I didn't think we had it, Matt, when you were there.
You had it, but it was sitting in the corner.
we were too scared to.
You were too scared to change anything.
Yeah.
You kept looking at it when we were washing, just like wondering if you could figure out how to use it, but you weren't quite sure.
Yeah. So that's another thing. It's a specialist piece of machinery that I think has really improved the sake, and also the time. It's all about efficiency is as we're finding, is very important as well. Limited time to succeed and get there.
So what you're essentially doing in a way is you're kind of doing it, from the ground up, doing it the traditional way, and then, like you say, they introduce these pieces of equipment to try and make the brewing more efficient, or whatever. And if you're trying to brew with just one person or two people, that's where that kind of equipment becomes essential, especially if you want to produce, volume. Yeah. But it's doing it the way they were doing it hundreds of years ago.
That was our intention at the start, is to try and do it in the traditional method.
So before we dig too deep into the nitty gritty and stuff like that, we'll get into that. But I also, this gentleman Matt chimed in a moment ago, so I want to make sure we get this gentleman on mic, figure out who else is huddled around the table here. Matt, so you're making sake in a certain capacity with
Yes.
future intentions to make more sake.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
Tell us about what you're up to.
Well, I think if Dave considers himself a novice, I'm a village amateur in the world of brewing sake. Me and my partner Quentin, who's back in Australia manning the ranch, as it were, while I gallivant around Japan. Both come from a restaurant background in Melbourne. I came from a more sommelier background for the last 6 or 7 years, and he was slightly more management. And we'd get together every now and again and drink too much of something and say that we should make it when we're drunk. We tried to make some Italian-style Amaro at one stage to mixed success. And then we saw other people do it more successfully and more commercially than we ever thought we could. And I guess we kind of just saw the craft industry in Melbourne and Australia in general growing and growing. And, you know, you can't move a gin distillery or a craft brewer in Melbourne. But no one was making sake. And yeah, after one too many bottles of sake, we decided we'd take it upon ourselves. I think it was that night when we got drunk on sake and said, well, we'll take it upon ourselves. We emailed Dave in New Zealand because we'd heard about the New Zealand sake brewer. And whilst Dave isn't necessarily the quickest to respond in email, he got back to us eventually. And
Marie's dying over here. There's something. She has, for about like the last 10 minutes, she like keeps having these reoccurring fits of like there's.
If you think he was scared of the woods and wise, what's it just seeing what it looks like a laptop?
It's a bit of an awkward joke at Dave, you know, like, I don't know if I'm supposed to laugh at this or not, but I know because his inbox has been exploding since 1999. And yeah, it's I think it's a part of Dave's charm, you know.
But I shouldn't take the mick. I shouldn't take the mick. He was very gracious and generous with his time in the end. So
Inbox is not top of my list.
No, I know it's not. I know it's not, mate. And yeah, Dave was very generous with his time in the end, and he offered for us to go and work there for 2 weeks with him, brewing. So we did that. Learned from Dave how to do things. Saw how he was going about things, and like you guys touched on the equipment. You know, we. You can read all the textbooks in the world and watch all the videos in the world and theorize that, you know, maybe we could steam rice in a stock pot. And, you know, yeah, maybe that's true. But then you go to Queenstown and visit Dave, and that's exactly what he's doing. And you go, it can be done. So after 2 weeks of seeing Dave do his thing and how he was achieving things, it kind of gave us the confidence that we could do the same thing ourselves. We both came back from those 2 weeks in New Zealand and sort of marinated for a couple of days and both said to each other, now let's do it. So planned a trip to the States to kind of do the same kind of thing. We spent 6 weeks over in the United States visiting craft breweries. Sounds kind of counterintuitive to go to America to learn how to brew sake until you think about it. So the way I decided to learn to brew sake was go to New Zealand and the States. But in terms of size and scale and make it up as you go along DIY, that was the way we did it. So we did 6 weeks in the States visiting various breweries and learn, you know, more and more along the way, and different solutions, different ways of doing things. And came back from that, both quit our full-time jobs and decided to give it a go.
Okay, there you are. You're in Melbourne. I want to brew sake. You need water. You need rice. How did you tackle these issues?
So, still tackling. Haven't finished the tackling yet. Water, we're lucky in Melbourne in that it's, and don't quote me exactly on this, but I think the American way of measuring it in parts per million, we're between 10 and 26 parts per million hardness, which is soft even by Japanese standards.
Indeed.
I think very, very soft in Japan is below 30 from what I understand. So we're.
What about you, Dave, actually?
I'm not very good on numbers, but I have researched, remembering numbers, but I have researched it, and we're like, not competing with Melbourne, of course, but super soft.
We're both super soft.
Super soft. Yeah. And we, that's one of the things we looked at very early on, as soon as I'd done a little bit of study and learned here in Japan about the effects of hard water and soft water.
It's not just the hardness, is it? It's how many minerals it actually contains. Because when you're measuring the hardness of water, you actually only measure magnesium and calcium. Yes. You also have potassium, phosphorus, and one other, escapes my mind, which is actually what drives the yeast in the fermentation. So even when you have soft water in Japan, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to end up with what we would call a slow or kind of languid fermentation. It could still be quite aggressive, and you could still get quite robust and rich flavors from that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we did find that our water is runoff from glacial mountains, or mountains that have been carved by glaciers. So the rain, or the snow, basically falls and runs straight into the lake where we draw our water from. I'm not sure about Melbourne. Where did you?
Nor am I. No, do I. It's not snowmelt. That's for sure. There's 4 different reservoirs that serve Melbourne as municipal water, I understand, and they're all slightly different in the way they're kind of formed. I'm not professing to be an expert by any stretch. I turned the tap on and measured the water, and that was enough to kind of give us the confidence. Like you said, I guess the things that fell into place when we were planning on brewing sake was, well, look, can we get rice? Yes, Australia grows lots and lots of rice. Cool, well, that's one good part. What's the water like? Japanese brewers use soft water. Well, let's look at the water. It's soft. Cool, maybe this is possible. Before we visited Dave, that kind of step was like, are we barking up the wrong tree here, or is this actually something that looks like it could work? And yeah, those kind of things fell into place. Obviously, Sakamai is a little bit of a tricky one. No one's growing that in Australia yet. Obviously, the complete mad dream would be that we be able to help people do that and be a different way for the rice industry. Since we haven't released a batch commercially, that's maybe some way away, but that's kind of what we'd like to do. Kosher hikari is grown in Australia, widely enough for our purposes anyway, which we'd love to try and use eventually. We're not yet, but I know the thing, again, it's like inspiring confidence, is I have tasted sake made from kosher hikari that's good, and I've tasted sake from kosher hikari that's not polished much, which, as we talked about before recording, milling sake rice, or milling any rice, to a semi-buai you'd think of for sake in Australia isn't really possible yet because there's no industry. So tasting these sakes from 90% kosher hikari, I'm not suggesting I've got the level of skill or ability to do it yet, but that is the aim, and I know it's possible because I've tasted some.
Yeah, and that's something I'm really super curious about, because you're talking about, okay, so we're going to turn on the faucet, we're going to measure it, we're going to see where we're at. The first question is always, given the resources readily available, can we make something that we could call sake? Is of course step one. But when you decide you're going to make sake, usually it's not just, I'm going to make sake and I'm going to be satisfied with it. You've had some sort of experience or some sort of something that is informing the type of sake that you want to make. And whether you can, of course, you know, nobody can do that from batch number 1, maybe not from batch number 10, maybe not from batch number, 30, 40, 50 in the first, 4 or 5 years. I reckon, that's clearly, there's a long-term vision. I'm just sort of curious what that, from the get-go, what that vision is for, not just I'm going to make sake, but how do you envision the sake that you are going to make? How is that how do you integrate that into your planning, both initially as you get started, as well as sort of long-term? How do you, I'm curious sort of how you guys are both sort of address that, or how you think about that.
Well, I guess kind of our manifesto from the get-go is to make the best sake we can from what we have available at the time. Water-wise, it's unchangeable as far as we're concerned for now. We have the soft water, so it's going to be a soft water sake. We have the rice we have available. We'll make what we can. We both me and Quentin, my partner, come from more of a wine and beer background. I think, and I'm English, he's Australian, we like strong flavours. So kind of we come from it, we love Yamahai, we love Komoto, we like sort of stronger, robust, Genshu type stuff as well, I guess, to go with more food. Like Zenkuro's beautiful Moroccan Nama Genshu that we're enjoying while we record, may I just say.
Well done.
We are
available in all good liquor stores.
If you're quick, only if you're quick.
And Dan Murphy's. So yeah, we're not too scared of acidity or robust flavours in our sake. I don't think there's a wrong or right style to be made. We appreciate delicate, light daiginjos for sure. But yeah, aside from sort of stylistically what we're trying to do, it's just to make the best things with the raw materials we have. And as I said before, a bit of a pipe dream at this stage, but to improve those raw materials and make it into easier for us and better to make the sake with. So sake varieties of rice, maybe different yeasts down the track. which isn't necessarily the easiest thing to acquire outside of Japan. But yeah, I guess the overall manifesto is to make the best we can, slightly richer, more robust, maybe is our taste, and improve on that as we go.
Is there something out there that's kind of is your benchmark? Do you have anything that, at least where it's like, if we can get somewhere in this vicinity, we feel comfortable putting this out into the world? Is there something you said, given the rice that you have and the resources you have and the ability to polish, are you thinking you're going to start with a Yamaha or something along those lines, or is there something out there that you've seen that you're like, this is, if that you're sort of striving for to
I see what you're saying.
From a start line or something? I
wouldn't say there's one thing out there that we're trying to attain or emulate, because that's going to be as nigh on impossible, I'd say. I think maybe we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but talking about the price difference of importing sake to Australia compared to us producing it ourselves. I think Dave actually showed us a really important point, which was if you're trying to find the perfect product that you're happy with to release, you're never going to release anything. And you're going to be brewing for 5 years until you release something. So you can't do that. I didn't necessarily think about that in those terms until Dave made that quite clear. So that was a really good lesson. And I guess what we're trying to do, or what I would be happy with releasing, is tasting the sake and going, would I pay for that in a restaurant at the price we're going to offer it? And it doesn't need to be perfect or amazing or a transcendent experience that I think would change people's views on sake, but it needs to be, if I was myself sitting in a restaurant as a relatively hard-nosed consumer, would I be happy having bought that? And that's kind of the way mark, maybe.
So Dave, then, so how about for you when you got started? What was your initial, was there something that you were striving to make? And then sort of what has that iteration process looked like for you over the last 5 years or so?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not sure I would like Matt to be one of my customers. But similar at the start, and it was advice I got from Japanese brewers, is just use whatever you can get your hands on. And yeast, we started with baker's yeast and wine yeast, ale yeast, and the rice was, I could buy in the supermarket, probably milled 5% or 10%. And the advice was, don't worry about the rice, don't worry about the yeast, just practice brewing. So the first 10, 15, 20 batches were just about practicing. And I still release them.
So that's what I'm curious about too. So you're able to iterate. There's nothing restricting you from brewing and experimenting and putting those things out to the world, either as a novice brewer or as an official product. That's a liberty that we do not have here in Japan.
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of curious. You have the choice as to whether or not you want to get down, get your hands dirty in the kitchen, after dinner or whatever, and do that on a very small scale, versus actually making something, putting it out into the world. Here, even if it's beer, you have a lot of craft beer breweries that are popping up right and left all over the place in Japan now, whereas their initial brews essentially would have been, home brews for a lot of people. It's the type of stuff a lot of people started with, and it's, a little bit all over the place right now. You've got all kinds of amazing craft beer in Japan, but with the boom you've got, it's starting to become a little bit chaotic in that, most people's starting point is, this is the first time I've ever done this. And it's, you said you released your first product, but how was there a stage or a process in there where it was like, I'm tinkering around at home and now I'm going to bottle it and try and put it on a shelf?
No, it was, for me, it was actually a third batch. Other than the double rock stage, before I actually started doing or even knew about sandanji komi, it was Doboroku, and then did a study and went to Canada in particular, and I wrote down the procedure and the methods and came back and tried it. So 3 batches from there. I took some in to my wife for dinner one night, and she drank it and nodded. So just gave me the confidence to put it out there, and we didn't say, this is the greatest sake in the world, of course, but we said it's New Zealand's first, and give it a try, see what you think. At the time, he was like, well, good, it's not too bad. but now people are saying, "Oh, I remember that first sake."
Had you thought about your brand at that point in time?
Yes, yeah. So the brand Zenkuro, all black, that popped out long before the sake ever arrived. Yeah. We played around with a lot of stuff in our heads and dreamt, and that was one of the fun things, coming up with a name. We always wanted to use kanji. Yeah, the name was very early on. Yeah.
What made you want to impress these characters upon your label?
Yeah.
What was it? What was the driving sort of motivation behind that?
We wanted to show our respect for Japanese things, and in particular craftsmanship, making things by hand, keeping things simple, and thought it was a good place to start. And it was just, for me, it was always, never really thought about it very much, but the name was going to be in kanji. But obviously, as you've mentioned, it needs to be accessible and understandable. So we had to think of something that New Zealanders would get their heads around quite quickly, and something that Japanese would be able to relate to New Zealand as well. So it became a bit of a compromise by putting down beside the characters, we've got Zenkuro written in English as well.
I think it's brilliant. I love it.
I love it. I love it. I heard it and I went, oh yeah, of course. Why not? What else? It seems like a no-brainer when you hear it, but it's so clever. Can I just ask you? You said that third batch was kind of like the one where you decided to release, and then how many other batches after that were successful, or did you have kind of go through another kind of more kind of failed batches, or how difficult was it to reproduce that flavor that you'd given to your wife that night and she'd given you praise for?
Probably never produced it again. But that wasn't particularly good. In all honesty, it was just much better than number one and number two, I think. And the rice we used, the methods, everything has changed completely. If we're going to talk about a number, batch number 7, I remember it well because we got a medal at the London Sake Challenge with our 7th batch. And the 8th batch was completely different from the 7th. And I think it was that batch was one person bought the whole batch. So that kind of disappeared into nowhere. And then I think from memory, from about batch 9, we started using Calrose milled to 60%, which was a big change as well.
Until that point, it was what we're using?
From batch 3 onwards, I think it was Calrose as 70%, milled. Yeah, and from that batch on as well, it was 901 yeast, which changed things obviously. But it's through to the sake we've just tasted there is batch number 52. And when I get back next week, we'll start on batch 54. So we're still, we still haven't done that many. But from about batch 40 onwards, and about when Marie, maybe Marie's last batch, we sort of changed again and changed our direction.
I joined at batch number 18.
18.
Correctly to this day.
Yeah, 18 was with Calrose once again, and we're constantly looking for ways to improve, and most of those ways came from visits to Japan and talking to brewers and saying, "Hey, this is what it tastes like, and this is what's happening. Any ideas?" And they give you advice or just show you how they do it, and then you'd give it a try, and sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't change things much. But we've kind of found our direction, I think, now, and we're going to stick with that for a little while.
who are your biggest fans? Who would you say your demographic is in New Zealand at the moment?
Well, 90% of the sakes we make is sold in New Zealand, and perhaps surprisingly to some people, it's not Japanese restaurants. Things have changed a lot. The appreciation for sake is spreading. It's gone beyond a beverage that needs to be enjoyed with Japanese food, and probably Matt would know more about this than me, coming from Melbourne. But sort of modern New Zealand food. Obviously, we have a lot of very good fresh ingredients in New Zealand, and until about 20 years ago, we probably didn't have ideas and experience on how to make best use of the ingredients. But our chefs have been out there getting new ideas, and there's a lot of Asian flavour influence in New Zealand now.
And for
So those customers.
to our listeners, I should say that we are enjoying Zenkuro with a local New Zealand cheese, aren't we?
Yes,
so
it's quite simple, isn't
and
it?
the pairing works very well.
And I was just thinking, as you were talking about New Zealand food, I was just thinking this sake that we're drinking now, I can see that going really well with lamb, which of course is it's a big staple, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Yeah.
And in particular for visitors to New Zealand, they tend to eat the cuts of lamb that we don't eat at home very often. But it's something we have tried to work on. It's hard to brew one sake that will match with everything, and I don't even know if it's worthwhile trying that. But we have a little bit of a range now, so if you can pick one from the range to go with this, one to go with that, or if you're eating this, choose the drip press or so forth. But yeah, lamb is something we have tried to pair it with.
When you said that it's not, your sake isn't served quite so much in Japanese or Asian cuisine restaurants specifically, is part of that have to do with being based in Queenstown? Do you sell a lot of your product in Queenstown? Is that sort of a unique market, just being such a huge tourist population, or is most of your product available in Auckland, or is it just a completely different thing? Is that an all New Zealand sort of a trend, or is that something sort of unique to where you're at and where you have access to?
No, it's actually an all New Zealand trend. Yeah, when we started, we sort of thought, okay, there's 200 Japanese restaurants in New Zealand, and if we can sell, one bottle a week to each one of them, we'll be sweet. and there's a Japanese food at the time, a boom. I think it's not really a boom now. It's just Japanese food is normal. It's one of the world's cuisines, and children in New Zealand eat sushi for lunch. Their mums make them sushi for lunch, for example. So it's out there, and so we kind of thought that the Japanese food boom, and we'll be able to ride that wave a little bit, but it didn't really work like that, and we found it easier to. There's so many chefs in New Zealand, food and beverage people, who are looking for new things and new flavors, and they soon caught on that sake actually works well with all these sort of international fusion. I guess the word is fusion. Food seems to go very well. So while it was very important for us to be involved with Japanese restaurants and Japan, we probably sort of figured out now that that's not the main area we need to be focusing on.
As an outsider visiting Queenstown, when I went to visit Dave, coming from a restaurant background, it was really, really cool to see the breadth of businesses supporting him. So, we'd go for breakfast at a place and they were using sake and a cocktail from Zenkuro. We went to a different place that wasn't having to do with Japanese and they were using Zenkuro. So I couldn't put a number on it, but went to a lot of different places and just looking around for research purposes, and Zenkuro was everywhere. So it was being supported in a really cool way. So it was really good to see a community sort of effort supporting the local stuff there. That was cool. I was very impressed by that.
So as somebody who's about to create something, put it out into the world, are you looking at developing sort of that community at this stage? What sort of you were mentioning earlier, you have a great, craft beer wine making communities, and I imagine maybe there's some support on that end, but also as far as getting into restaurants or getting into places, are you starting to make some of those connections and stuff at this point?
Well, I guess one of the sort of main advantages of my background is knowing the restaurant industry in Melbourne and knowing a few people as well. Like Dave was saying, I think the biggest avenue for growth for sake at the moment is that it's not just for Japanese food, not just for having, Japanese restaurants. It's for lots of different things. There's the old saying, sake doesn't fight with food. And I think that's never more appropriate than in modern restaurants nowadays. And people are starting to see that. Melbourne is about a 4 million people population, which is probably the same as New Zealand.
That's
pretty much.
Yeah.
So lucky in the respect that sort of our local audience is a little bit bigger than Dave's. Hopefully they'll be somewhere near as supportive in our endeavours.
I'm sure they will be. Yeah.
Hope so.
Yeah.
If you're listening, buy Melbourne Sake when it's out.
And I think Australia is quite a long way ahead of New Zealand in terms of understanding and spread of sake.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
Sydney's had a big Japanese population for a very long time. And you'd be hard pushed to go to a fine dining restaurant in the whole country that hasn't got sake as part of its offering. Not just on the list, but as part of their food matching. So whilst that's not necessarily filtering down to every pub and country town in Australia,
every watering hole,
you're not finding not finding many Nama sakes being served on tap in a country pub. The interested foodie and diner is becoming much more familiar with sake, and it's definitely not Japanese focused. This goes well with this.
And then with Japanese restaurants, there's already obviously
Heaps of product already. Yeah.
Competitors with a big head start. So from a business point of view, it's not necessarily the smart place to look to be selling your brand new product that no one's ever tasted as well.
Yeah, best not to go toe to toe.
Yeah, I was wondering that. Like, what kind of concerns you had to begin with? Kind of, that if the sake you produced and you put out would end up maybe having a negative impact on the audience there. But that's the first concern that I think I would have if I wanted to start brewing, and that would be a pressure, quite a heavy burden to have on your shoulders to be the first one. Kind of how did you deal with that? And sort of were there any strategies that you employed to kind of combat that?
I guess what made it easier was getting some recognition at London Sake Challenge. That sort of was a big help, and I guess we didn't sort of try to throw the net out there at everyone. We selected the restaurants we thought we could work with, who knew us and would help us. So it was like we went to them for advice and what kind of what do you think this sake would go with on your menu, sort of thing. So softly, slowly, and just one step at a time, and hopefully in the end, a couple of the Japanese restaurants came to us and said, "Okay, we're ready for you now." But it took 3.5 years.
Sake means alcohol, so any product with alcohol could be sold as sake. I mean, in Japan or overseas. I mean, you cannot call your product Nihonshu. So how is that a threat? Do you see it as a threat, or how do you want to address the facts that anyone can release products in the market produced from not necessarily good rice, polished and fermented using sake yeast, and call it sake?
I don't think the market is strong enough for people to be trying to undercut you in such a way. It seems like the offering from most of what I've seen in the States and what Dave's doing and what we're trying to do is you're aiming to hit a very, very small segment of the kind of on-premise places, so restaurants and bottle shops that are doing high-quality stuff. If sake in Australia, New Zealand, America ever got to the point that people were trying to do bad quality futsushi, I'm sure we would have made our millions by then, because it would be, I wouldn't be so worried. Well, obviously, I wouldn't ever like to see that. But yeah, you don't see much futsu outside of Japan because the taxation's so high that it's not a thing. It's not a cheap entry level drink.
It's the fact that futsu is not selling here in Japan. The reason why the industry is such a
So it's not an entry level drink that you have when you're on a night out. It's a high level fine wine alternative in a good restaurant or bottle shop. So I wouldn't necessarily see that as a issue, at least for now. And as I said, if it ever does get to be an issue, I'm sure we'll be relatively happy that sake has done so well in our respective countries.
And that will do it for part 1 of this 2-part series, examining what goes into starting up a brewery outside of Japan. If you wouldn't mind popping on over to Apple Podcasts to rate and review us, we would greatly appreciate that. Also, feel free to follow us on social media at Sake On Air, or send us your questions or comments about the show to questions@sakeonair.com. Sake On Air is recorded and broadcast from the Japan Sake and Shochu Information Center in the heart of Tokyo, and made possible with the support of the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association. The show is a co-production between Export Japan and Podsuke Productions, with audio engineering and editing by Mr. Frank Walter. We will be back with part 2 very shortly, so please stay tuned and kanpai.